Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on today's programme, the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni meets President Trump at the White House today. Defence spending, Ukraine and tariffs all set to dominate the discussion. And researchers say they found the strongest signs yet of possible life beyond our solar system. We'll be asking space experts if this suggests we're not alone in the universe. Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, they say she is a Trump whisperer. I'm talking about the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who is currently in Washington. Well, she's meeting with the US President Donald Trump, who's long admired the right-wing leader. Well, her visit comes in the context of mounting trade tensions between the United States and Europe over tariffs. Well, Meloni is the first European leader to visit President Trump since he announced a 20% tariff on EU imports earlier on this month. That's now been lowered to 10% for a period of 90 days, allowing for negotiations to take place to try to find a possible trade deal. Well, let's speak now to Denis Macshane, former UK Minister for Europe in Tony Blair's government. He joins us from London. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. If any EU leader is going to de-escalate the trade war with the United States, it's probably Giorgia Meloni, isn't it?
I'm genuinely not sure. She is one of the more right-wing leaders in Europe, as you correctly say, so a little bit in tune with Donald Trump, but she's a good European. People thought the right-wingers here in England, the anti-Europeans, the Brexit crowd, all thought she would be joining them. But as soon as she started warming up and looking as if she was going to become a prime minister, head of the government, her mentor is Mario Draghi, who was president of the European Central Bank, an enormous, important political figure in Italy, and Mario Draghi is #1 Europhile, pro-European man you can find anywhere on the European earth. So maybe she can charm Donald, but he's pushing 80, he's getting close to 80. Is he charmable by a very nice Italian lady? We'll see. Others have tried. Sir Keir Starmer came with a big present for Mr. Trump, a handwritten invitation from the King of England for Donald Trump to make a state visit with all the pomp and ceremony and history he loves to Britain. And Donald Trump's response was to slap 25% tariffs on British car and steel exports, which led to Jaguar Land Rover, that's our equivalent, I suppose, of Fiat or Ferrari or Maserati. It suspended exports to America. I mean, Mr. Trump is a one-man bull wrecker.
Well, one thing's sure about Giorgia Meloni is she was the only European leader to be invited to President Trump's inauguration. So I think it's pretty safe to conclude, isn't it, that he quite likes her.
Yes, I mean, she's others were, but they weren't serving in government. I mean, from Britain, a man called Nigel Farage was sort of put in an outhouse somewhere, but he could claim he'd been at the inauguration. And I think I saw the former British Prime Minister Liz Truss, who crashed the UK economy, actually doing a lot of the things that Trump is doing, interfering with trade, watching interest rates rise, watching the stock market slump. She had that very right-wing ideology that there are simple answers to the world's economic problems, and she lasted 43 days in office. Well, Mr. Trump's got 4 years ahead of him. So one can only hope so, but Signora Meloni, Miss Meloni, is also constrained. She has to represent all of Europe, so Germany and France and Spain and the Netherlands, other countries, Eastern Europe, Poland, they all want these crazy tariffs to go and for the United States to get back in supporting the whole of Europe in saying to Putin, because Putin is now our biggest strategic enemy. This is the man who invaded Ukraine just as in the 1930s, and another certain gentleman invaded Poland. And we want Mr. Trump to say to Mr. Putin, back off. But Mr. Trump seems to regard Putin as his other best friend. So maybe we should ask Mr. Putin to go and talk to him after Miss Meloni.
Again, just on the subject of personal relationships, I mean, they seem to really matter to President Trump, perhaps more than many other world leaders, one could argue. And do you think personal relationships, having seen the goings-on in bilateral discussions that you've presumably been party to, do you think they matter in the context of trying to defuse a trade war like this one?
Honestly not. I would shuttlecock between Tony Blair and the then German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, or the French President, or Dominique de Villepin, the Foreign Minister. I knew them well. I spoke French. I spoke German. I campaigned with Gerhard. And Schröder was a friendly pro-Blair guy, but he once just sort of waved me away and said, "No, Denis, don't come and talk to me about what Tony Blair wants, because all I hear is the voice of Rupert Murdoch. And until Tony cuts free from Rupert Murdoch and speaks for Europe as well as simply the Murdoch position on everything, I'm not interested in him." That was just, he was tired, exhausted at the end of a bad day of negotiation. So I think Mr. Trump will say, "I love tariffs. Europe has been screwing us. Italy's been screwing us. You've taken advantage of America. Why? I mean, Italy has done nothing different from France, of Spain, the Netherlands, Sweden, Great Britain in terms of trade with America. And the fact they have a small ideological affiliation, not really a very big one, I don't think is going to make any difference." Mrs. Meloni says very clearly, Putin is the enemy of Europe. Mr. Trump refuses to criticize Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, I mean, clearly Ukraine is an area where Mrs. Meloni could serve as a bridge. I mean, there are people in Europe hoping she's going to represent the whole 27-nation bloc. But do you think she will, and do you think she does, or do you think she's going there very much flying the Italian flag and not the European one?
It's both, but she has to do both. I mean, she can't simply come back, "Well, I've got the President of the United States to agree to allow another 100,000 tons of Parmigiano to come in, or prosciutto di Parma, a nice ham from Italy." That's not going to wash with anybody in Europe. She'll make herself the laughingstock of Europe, and in Italy too, where there's a growing criticism of the way she's running the government. It's not, I don't think it's fatal politically, but she's not on the best and most solid of footing. So maybe, I mean, look, the Italian diplomats since Machiavelli have been the most brilliant people of reading the room, of working out what to say, of knowing how to give a little to get back a bit more. So she's got some very, very smart negotiators and diplomats in Rome and are working for Italy in the European Union. And indeed Mario Draghi himself, and indeed a lot of American Italians who I'm sure would like to see a good relationship between Ms. Meloni and Mr. Trump. But we will see. But look, the trouble with Donald Trump is, who knows what he will do tomorrow? Who knows what he'll do in the next 10 minutes? I don't really think Italy's on his running order. Miss Meloni is of much importance to him in America. People don't know who she is. And he's made it very clear that the one thing he shares with Putin is a real dislike of the European Union.
Where do you think that comes from, that hatred of Europe?
Very simply, well, for Mr. Putin, it's the same. What Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin have in common is they want the Europe of the 1920s, 30s back. I don't mean, fascists and all that stuff, but they want smaller countries that don't cooperate, that can be picked off or bought off one by one by one. And what Europe's done, by accident more than great design, is to sink a lot of differences. And on trade, above all, since day one, all trade on behalf of all EU member states, doesn't matter if it's mighty industrial Germany, it doesn't matter if it's tourist ancient history Greece, doesn't matter if it's wonderful cuisine France, Italy, all their trade is done by the European Union officials working with the national officials so that Europe speaks as one voice. And when they do, it's a very, very powerful bloc. And so Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and I'm sure Mr. Xi in China, would like to see Europe disaggregate again into individual nation states. They all thought Britain, with Brexit leaving the European Union, that would start a rush out of Europe 10 years ago, 9 years ago. It hasn't happened. Europe's got bigger since Britain left, and not a single country wants to follow the British example because, to be perfectly honest, we've become poorer, we've lost trade access, so we've lost a lot of international clout. Brexit has not been a success story for Great Britain.
And when you say, Europe obviously speaking with one voice, that idea might explain some of the disquiet and perhaps unease in European capitals about Mrs. Meloni kind of going it alone. We had the French industry minister, Marc Ferracci, who was warning last week that Europe is only strong if it's united. He said, if we start having bilateral discussions, obviously it will break the current dynamic. I mean, do you think there are people like Mr. Ferracci in France around Europe who don't like the idea of Mrs. Meloni kind of going it alone on Europe's behalf?
It's rather ironic that, and you're speaking to a Francophile who knows, met President Macron and obviously more on the left, but I love France. But don't forget, when Putin invaded Russia, Mr. Macron went to see him by himself. He was humiliated by President Putin, who sat him in the other end of a very long table. I mean, it's like half the length of a football pitch at times. You always need binoculars to see each other, and treated him as an irrelevancy. And I wept for my France, and I wept for my Europe at the time. It sits in the past now. And Mr. Macron has come back into the fold. He's now working with the new Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, working very closely with Sir Keir Starmer. Okay, we're not in the European Union, but Britain is a big European defence, security, intelligence player, and we are speaking as one. And I don't think, absolutely no disrespect to Italy, but there are countries in Europe which have got a record of being heavyweights when it comes to military activity. I wouldn't quite, and I don't want to upset or tread on the toes of any Italian friend, I wouldn't quite say that's Signora Meloni's speciality. She's got to find other reasons, and she can charm something out of Trump. We'll all be the better off for it, and America will be the better off for it. I mean, nobody knows how we're going to get this old geezer guy to work sensibly and intelligently, but throw everything at him. And we've tried a guy called Peter Mandelson, my friend, who's a British ambassador. People thought, oh, he's a brilliant talker, schmoozer, pro-American. He said Trump was unfairly criticized. We sent him over there. He's had no access to Trump, and Trump has treated Britain with exactly the same indifference, borderline contempt he's treating France, Italy, Germany, Poland, Greece, the rest of Europe.
One thing that Mrs. Meloni is going to be a little uncomfortable discussing with President Trump is defence spending, because Italy spends about 1.5% of GDP on defence. That is a long way away, isn't it, from the 2 to 5% of GDP, 2 being the absolute minimum that the United States would like to see European heavyweights or European powers spending.
I'm tempted almost to say no comment, but you make the point for me very well, Alex. This is a speciality of this other odd chap, J.D. Vance. He is the one who's always finger-wagging and lecturing Europe on defence spending. Some countries in Europe, Poland, others in the Baltic states spend more than America. Some still have partial national service, conscription, which America doesn't, for example, take the case of Greece. But yes, I mean, Italy has not really been much of a defence spender. But that I don't think right now it's defence is important, especially when we get back thinking about Mr. Putin's invasion of Ukraine. But right now the stock markets are in turmoil, the bond markets are in turmoil. There's no certainty. Nobody knows where to put money, whether it's in, and that's why gold is doing very well, because, when you can't invest your money intelligently, what do? You run for cover and you buy gold. You've been doing it for about 3,000 years. And it is this incredible instability and uncertainty, and nobody knows where Mr. Trump's going to wake up from one day or 1 hour to the next, what he's going to say and what he's going to decide. So she's a nice, she gets on well with people, Miss Meloni. I mean, she's not some sort of unpleasant person. Her English isn't bad at all. I've heard her speak English in different countries. So, and I'm sure somebody will be feeding her brilliant lines, the cleverest minds in Italy. And don't forget, Italy gave us Machiavelli, it gave us most of the popes we've ever known, very clever men. They'll be there whispering, saying to her, Mrs. Prime Minister, say this to him, make that point to him. Maybe some of it will get through. We can only hope so.
Well, she did a good job, didn't she, of winning over President Biden, Donald Trump's predecessor. So in one sense, she scored some points already in Washington. Just lastly, I mean, just reading the commentators and the editorials in the Italian press, some of them warning that this visit by Mrs. Meloni isn't without risk. One commentator said it's full of potential pitfalls. I mean, do you think they've got in mind in Italy and perhaps in lots of other European countries this fear that perhaps they'll have an Oval Office situation like the one that President Zelensky had?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, that's something quite different in that Donald Trump said incessantly, I mean, he's since Putin invaded Ukraine in 2022, now 3 years ago, he said, if I was president, not Joe Biden, this war would never have happened. I would have solved it. I would have settled it. And of course, he has been president now for a good chunk of time, and absolutely nothing's happened. I mean, Putin is playing him like a fool, embarrassing him. I mean, Putin's attack on a civilian area, Sumy, killing 35 people, including children, that was giving the finger to Donald Trump. And the Italians understand what giving the finger is in Italian as in any other language. We'll see whether she can find some words. And by the way, were I an advisor to Mrs. Meloni, I would not say, well, I charm Joe Biden, I can do the same with Donald Trump. If you mention Joe Biden anywhere in Washington, not just in the Oval Office, but within a mile radius of where Donald Trump is, he'll pick it up. And anybody who speaks well of Joe Biden, in his view, is somebody he doesn't want to do business with. So I'd shut out Joe Biden, find something else about Donald Trump, some secret way into his inner soul and heart, and see if she can get him to just restore a little sanity to world affairs before it gets a lot worse.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Denis Macshane, always a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you so much.
Well, for more, we can speak now to Greg Swenson, the chair of Republicans Overseas, who joins us from the United States. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Always a pleasure to speak to you. I mean, the main topics of discussion between Mrs. Meloni and Mr. Trump look like being tariffs, Russia, with Ukraine sort of thrown into the mix, and defense spending. I mean, I don't know if you agree with that. What do you think she can achieve on those fronts?
Well, hopefully something. I think that they get along really well. I think Giorgia Meloni was very popular in Washington, even in the Biden administration, even though politically they were on opposite ends of the spectrum, Tom. So I think she's in a really great spot. She's very popular in D.C., but she's much more politically aligned with President Trump. She's more of a populist, a nationalist, conservative. So I think she's in a really good place. And by the way, she's charming and people really like her. So I think that she's in a really good position on all three of those topics.
Yeah, those pictures of the two of them, Mrs. Meloni and Mr. Trump, having a chat and a catch-up at the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. I believe they were at a dinner at the Versailles Palace. I mean, they seem to get on really well, and that echoes what you're saying. President Trump afterwards described her as a live wire. For those of us that don't speak American English, but how would you translate that?
I think it means just high energy. And which she is. I would assume. I've never not met her, but she appears to be very high energy and likable. And so, I think that's going to work out really well with President Trump. I think at Notre Dame, she was clearly his favorite, and that's not only personally, but politically, she's very much aligned. Whereas the voters in other countries in Europe are moving toward President Trump's politics. It's just that the leadership is still stuck in 2020.
Mrs. Meloni is, of course, a staunch ally of Ukraine and President Zelensky, really standing by that country when other allies perhaps have been less supportive. Do you think she brings a message with her with regards to Ukraine as well?
I think she will try. I'm not sure where she will rank that in terms of the priorities today, but I think, she from the beginning, she was a staunch supporter of Ukraine and very much a critic of Russia. I don't think that's inconsistent with what President Trump thinks. In fact, if you look at President Trump's first term, he was very aggressive on Putin and Russia. The problem is it's, now, that was then and this is now. And I think that he is really interested in stopping this war and, ending the war. And so, or at least stopping the killing. And so he's very much an anti-war president. So I'm not sure the timing is perfect. It's never perfect, but I do think they can have a decent conversation about it. And I think, that conversation is probably one that President Trump would not or could not have with other leadership in Western Europe.
I mean, some saying she's walking a bit of a tightrope here, sort of in a way having to choose between Washington and Brussels. And I'm just wondering how much pressure you think she's under from European leaders to somehow bring back something from this trip, and especially with regards to the tariff situation. I mean, how do you rate the chances of bringing something back to the whole of the European Union?
I'm sure it's much more likely with Giorgia Meloni than it is with anybody else in Europe at this point, with maybe a few exceptions like Poland. But, look, again, she's politically aligned with the president. She's politically aligned with many of the voters in Europe. So I think if anyone can do it, it will be her. The challenge is, she's not, while she might be representing the EU in this situation, it's a multilateral institution. I'm not sure that, she can really cut a deal, so to speak. I think, that she would probably leave that up to the trade people. Remember, Italy only has a 2 or 3 billion, I think it's $3 billion trade surplus with the United States. So in many ways, that puts her in a much better position, much like Keir Starmer for the UK, where her individual or Italy's individual trade surplus is relatively meaningless. So, that might help the situation, because I don't think the president would have, a problem with the fact that, Italy, yes, they export more than they import from the US, but on the other hand, it's not significant.
Indeed. So not too lopsided a trading arrangement between the United States and Italy. But one area where Mrs. Meloni is going to find herself perhaps sitting on the naughty step is with regards to her country's expenditure on defence, which is 1.5% of GDP, far below what Mr. Trump would like it to be. I mean, is that likely to count against her?
I think so. I think they can have a decent conversation about it, and perhaps she'll make a commitment to ease into a more reliable number. Italy's still a major economy. It's maybe not what it was comparatively to other countries that have really grown, but they're still in the top 10 globally, and the European countries combined are 10 times the GDP of Russia. And that's got to be a sticking point for President Trump, that, this is the, arguably a top tier economic bloc, and yet they're not spending enough on defense and security. And so, I think that is an issue, and she should have the conversation about it and make some sort of commitment. I know it can't happen overnight, but there needs to be commitments from the larger economies in Europe. The smaller ones are doing great, with the exception of the UK, who's always been above 2%. So I think, President Trump appreciates, and so does J.D. Vance, they appreciate the fact that the UK still has a sizable military, but the other large economies in Europe, Germany, Italy, Spain, and France, are completely underachieving. And I think that's a real problem for the president. So I'm quite sure that's on the agenda.
OK, so she gets no points for military spending, a few points possibly for the trade arrangement between the United States and Italy. But bottom line, and you know President Trump, you see him, I gather, quite often. I don't know when you last saw him, but does he value a relationship more than he would value those details, those numbers with regards to expenditure on defense and, trade surpluses?
Tom, it's a great question, and the answer is absolutely yes. He values the personal relationship. He knows that the defense spending is really a legacy that she inherited. I mean, that's not all on her. Now, maybe she hasn't, rallied enough, in terms of defense spending since she took office. I don't know that specifically, but I do think this has been a generational problem. So that's not on her. I think she's, if anybody, could bring some kind of spirit to Italy in terms of defending their country, defending their borders, and contributing to NATO and to the European allies. I think she'd be the one. And so I think it's an opportunity for her to make some commitments, long term. Maybe it's even purchasing American military equipment, buy some F-16s or, to get involved with some other military supplies. But they do need to play catch up. There's no doubt about it. And I think the continent collectively needs to play catch up.
Do you think a visit to the White House by the EU chief Ursula von der Leyen is still a very, very long way off?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. Look, she's saying on occasion, she says the right things. She didn't say the right thing yesterday when she was complaining about the president. But, 2 weeks ago, she was one of the first world leaders, if not the first, to say, I want to reach out to the White House and negotiate a trade deal and maybe even zero tariffs. So, on occasion, she says the right things. I think it's likely, to at least a visit to Washington. Not sure she's going to get the red carpet. The president loves bilateral relationships. He doesn't really care as much for multilateral relationships. So it puts the UK and Keir Starmer in a much better position, in my view, than the EU.
Do you think he's likely to portray the visit to the White House by Mrs. Meloni as being yet another world leader coming to him, cap in hand, on bended knee, desperate for a deal, or perhaps using even more colourful language than that?
I'm not sure he'll get more colorful than that. I don't think
he has done in the past.
He really likes her.
He's talked about hissing various parts of the body.
Well, that's true. But I think that he will use this to his advantage. He'll definitely be happy about it and speak highly of the visit. I don't think he'll go. Maybe I would hope he doesn't go too far and say, she's come hat in hand. I think he really likes her personally, and I think he would take advantage of it on one hand. Because he'll turn it into a positive, that's for sure. But I don't know that he has to go too deep on that, like he will with the EU, like he has with other countries that have reached out.
Mrs. Meloni's got another important ally in the White House in the form of the Vice President, J.D. Vance, and he's going to be in Rome at the weekend, being hosted by her. I mean, she's also been defending him, hasn't she? When he made those comments at the Munich Security Conference, she sprung to his defense. So she's quite cleverly, hasn't she, forged two really important Washington relationships?
Yeah, what a smart move that was. And by the way, I think she was able to say that with confidence about the vice president because he was right. And it's one of the reasons that she was elected. Remember, she ran on, sort of a mass migration issue. And that was a big part of her election. So, that's important for her. It's important for the rest of Europe. And again, in terms of the voters right now are frustrated by mass migration and censorship. J.D. Vance is quite outspoken on those issues, and so is Mrs. Meloni. So, good for her. I think this is a real great opportunity for both of them.
So just lastly, you would say the words Trump whisperer to describe Mrs. Meloni would be no exaggeration.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think she would rank in the top 5 in terms of relationships, bilateral relationships with the U.S., but specifically with the president and the vice president. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Greg Swenson.
Thanks.
Always
Thanks, Tom. Great to be here. Thanks.
Now, new evidence suggests we may not be alone in the universe. Well, scientists have discovered what they're calling the strongest evidence yet of life beyond Earth on a distant planet named K2-18b. Well, roughly 2.5 times the size of planet Earth, K2-18b lies about 124 light years away, or around 700 trillion miles away. That's well beyond the reach of human travel. Well, the discovery comes from a team at Cambridge University, which detected molecules in the planet's atmosphere that on Earth are only produced by simple living organisms. Well, the signs were spotted using NASA's James Webb Telescope. Well, let's get more on this discovery, and we can speak now to Dr. David Whitehouse, who is a space expert and the author of biographies on the Moon and the Sun. We can also speak to Nick Pope, former chief UFO investigator for the British Ministry of Defence. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us. Dr. Whitehouse, let me start with you. Are you excited?
I'm moderately excited. This is a very interesting hint, the first step on the ladder of finding out if there's life in space. This is a very different planet, as you've said, a much larger planet, a planet that could be gaseous like Uranus and Neptune, or perhaps even have an ocean. And it orbits a very different type of star, a red dwarf star, which is much fainter than the Sun, but it orbits closer in than the Earth does of our star. And it receives about as much radiation and heat. And therefore you could have liquid water on the surface of this planet. And what James Webb has done, it's able to exquisitely look at the atmosphere of exoplanets, of these planets around nearby stars, and tell you something about their chemical structure. And there is a molecule, we think, in this atmosphere, which is, on the Earth at least, is only produced by life. And therefore it is a hint. And the question now is it the case that this is only produced by life, or are there other ways to produce it, which could be a possibility, this could be what it's telling us, or is this indicative of perhaps an ecology of some sort down there on the surface of the planet or down there in the ocean of the planet? This is very early days. It is only a hint. It may well go away, but we may have to wait for other observatories like the forthcoming Habitable Worlds observatories to make a closer look at this to find out for sure.
OK, Nick, let me turn to you. What went through your mind when you heard this news?
Well, I'm very excited about this. I think it's great news, and I think it's going to kickstart a very interesting global conversation about the implications of all this. I mean, it's important to say, of course, that this has not yet been confirmed. We need more validation, we need more data, and that's going to happen. And even if it is confirmed, of course, this is likely to be microbial life and certainly not something more advanced. I mean, this is a biosignature, not a technosignature. A technosignature would be very exciting because it would indicate an industrial, perhaps spacefaring civilization. But whatever the truth of this is, as I say, an opportunity to have a very interesting global conversation, because the implications of our not being alone are going to be deep and profound, and they're going to affect everything from religious belief to personal philosophy as we think about who we are and what our place is in the cosmos.
Yeah, I want to ask you, Dr. Whitehouse, what you think it would mean for humankind to know and to have proof of life on another planet.
Well, if it does turn out that this is an ecology of some sort, then that is highly significant, because the gap between no life and a bacterium is much greater between a bacterium and ourselves. It is the major step in the formation of life. So if we find ecologies on nearby planets, then yes, it does confirm what is a growing feeling among astronomers, that the universe could be well teeming with life, and that the universe has it on the planets and perhaps in other areas as well throughout the cosmos, a fertile ground for life to develop in whatever form it could develop. So this is extremely interesting. It's pointing the right way to life in space, but this is far from the evidence of intelligence, which many people want, which would only come with, say, a signal, an arrival, or an artifact. And that would enable us to put ourselves in a cosmic context, to ask the important questions of ourselves as to whether or not, as a species, we are unusual, whether or not we are common, whether or not our type of species is widespread, or whether or not other species out there which are bound to be older than ourselves are fundamentally different. We will not understand ourselves, our religion, our philosophy, our history, our science, unless we have another species born under the light of a different star, possibly much older than ourselves, to compare ourselves with.
Nick, when you were at the Ministry of Defence investigating UFOs, I mean, did you think that perhaps in your lifetime the day would come when, I know we're not there yet, and I'm not getting ahead of myself, but did you think perhaps the day would come in your lifetime that we would see and discover life forms on another planet?
I thought so, yes. I mean, unless we thought there was something almost literally magical in a sort of Harry Potter way about planet Earth, and life was unique. It seemed to me that the laws of physics were going to be the same in the observable universe and chemistry and such like. And the fact that even though this planet, I mean, 124 light years is an unimaginable distance for us, but yet in cosmic terms, it's right on our doorstep. And so the implication would be if life exists here on Earth and just 124 light years away, then there should be other life out there. And given the age of the universe and the rate of star formation, it's intriguing to speculate that there could be, if that life has evolved into something more complex like us, there could be civilizations out there that might be 1 billion more years ahead of us. And that's a really interesting thought, and perhaps a little bit of a scary one too. But again, time to have this conversation about the potential societal impact of finding out that we're not alone in the universe, and maybe one day having some sort of contact.
Yeah, I mean, it raises a lot of questions, and as we've been saying, it challenges pretty much every norm every human that's ever lived has had established in their brain. I just want to ask you, Dr. Whitehouse, I mean, this was found by the James Webb Space Telescope, launched about 4 years ago. I mean, there are other space telescopes in production, and presumably they're constantly being upgraded, and new ones are coming out. NASA's got one. Europe has something called the Extremely Large Telescope, which I gather will be rolled out at some point in the near future. Can we expect, therefore, do you think, more and more of these types of discovery, the better our abilities get in terms of the technology?
Well, the technology of observing the sky is increasing all the time. In terms of what we can detect, the precision we can measure is actually quite remarkable, even over a few years ago. And it is interesting that in the search for signals from intelligent life in space, we have so far had about 70 searches, and we have detected nothing that is unusual or extraordinary. And that actually tells us something very interesting about searching for life in space, because searching for microbes on a nearby star is the ancillary to searching for intelligences such as our own. And as it was said, they could be, it's unlikely they would be as young or as dumb as we are. They could be much older than us. And the question is, and the question should be engaged with more often, because this could happen tomorrow, is will there be billion-year-old cosmic princes of peace who would look on us benevolently? Or could they have had 1 billion years to build up a nasty attitude and not just like our form of life? No human knows the answer to those questions. And since we could find intelligent life in space tomorrow, this is something that we should talk about, because until we find them, we will not be ready. And even when we find them, it may be too late for us to do anything about it.
Yeah, and with this amazing technology out there, these telescopes that are incredibly powerful and getting more powerful as the years go by, plus the advent of artificial intelligence, which presumably will be somehow incorporated into this technology. And I just wondered how astronomers and people looking for life beyond this planet, how they know where to point the telescope and which direction to look. Is there a process of elimination where they'd say, definitely not over there, let's try over here? Nick, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that's actually more a question for David with his area of expertise. But I think, it's the old adage, if what you're doing isn't working, try something else.
Okay, Dr. Whitehouse, how do you think astronomers decide where they're going to go on a hunt for? How do you think they made this discovery? What was the thinking behind it?
There have been various strategies to search for life, and they've been looking at nearby stars, particularly sun-like stars, and more recently red dwarf stars, which I think could be very good for a habitable place. More civilizations could develop around long-lived red dwarf stars and perhaps around our own yellow star. So individual stars sweeping the skies for beacons. There have been lots of strategies carried out because the thing is, you can't presume what an alien is like or how they would communicate with you. It's no human can think the way an alien thinks. But certainly over the next few years, with things like the Rubin telescope coming online soon, which are going to scan the sky several times a night, very quickly, looking for anything that moves, this is going to be a new paradigm in astronomy. We're going to get so much data about the things which change in space and the things which change seen in various wavelengths and in various ways, that we are going to actually set ground zero for the assumptions of life in space. And it may well be that when we do find life in space, be it intelligent or otherwise, it will not be through a targeted search of we are looking for this. It will be through the old adage of an astronomer looking at data and saying, that's strange, that's unusual, let's look a bit further at that. When I was a radio astronomer at Jodrell Bank, we looked at all sorts of objects, and each one of us had in the back of our mind, in the back of our drawers, a little program which looked for intelligent signals or evidence of artificiality, because we knew it could come from anywhere. So that's what makes the search for aliens, for intelligences, so exciting these days, because the technology is now growing up at such a rate that we are probing the universe in such great detail that we have hope that we may find intelligent life somewhere soon. And if we don't, well, that's telling us something significant as well.
I'll come back to Nick in just a moment, because while we were talking, Dr. Whitehouse, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, that subject about artificial intelligence, and I want to ask you whether you've seen or heard any suggestions that AI is going to do a better job of locating life outside this planet than we have done. I mean, after all, the potential is huge, isn't it?
Oh, certainly. I mean, space probes that are scanning the sky with looking for incredible amounts of data, like Euclid, like the Rubin telescope, like future telescopes, they produce a prodigious amount of data, which is impossible for a human to analyze. Therefore, AI intelligent programs are looking through these things for initially what we know. But what we've learned from AI and ChatGPT and stuff like that, large language models, is that AI can adapt and understand, and it can find things that we hadn't asked it to look for. So it may well be that we find in this vast amount of data coming from future space probes something strange that only AI would be able to pick up. If I was a young astronomer at this time, looking forward to these wonderful instruments over the next few decades, I'd be very hopeful about finding evidence for intelligent life in space.
Nick, let me turn back to you, and I'd like to sort of ask you to recall your time investigating UFOs for the British Ministry of Defence. First of all, I mean, are you aware, without giving away any British government state secrets, of any contingency plans or any comms plans? Is there a strategy in place on how to break news of this magnitude to the public, if indeed a massive and significant discovery is made like this?
No, there isn't. And rather sadly, a while ago, the British government was having a look at, just as a sort of fun, almost as a thought experiment, how it might be announced. I think that plan might be dusted off now. And I think governments all around the world need to start thinking about this, because whatever we might find, if we do find any definitive evidence of the existence of extraterrestrial life, and particularly if it is a civilization and not just microbes, this will touch almost every aspect of our society, I would think. Politics, religion, science, technology, the economy, philosophy, and much more besides. So why wouldn't we want to have that conversation? I should just pick up on the point about artificial intelligence. I mean, there was mention earlier of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence program, the radio astronomers looking for signals. That's a very good example of where AI can go back through the vast amounts of data that the SETI scientists have amassed over the years and look for patterns which, as David says, human analysts might miss.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the scope for marrying these two types of technologies is incredible. I'm just staying with you, Nick, for a moment. I'd ask you to draw on your memories working with the British Ministry of Defence. I mean, have you got any anecdotes to share with us, or any stories from your time there where you thought perhaps this really was, you'd fallen upon some pretty convincing evidence that you'd found evidence of a UFO or some sort of alien life form?
Well, we didn't have a smoking gun, but we did have some very interesting cases. And the ones that interested us were, of course, the ones where you had something detected across multiple platforms, multiple sensor platforms. And we've seen this recently, for example, with some of the US Navy videos and some of the other statements coming out that these things are being seen by pilots, tracked on radar, filmed on forward-looking infrared cameras, and sometimes detected on satellite. And when that happens, and when these things perform speeds, maneuvers, and accelerations that seem to go beyond the cutting edge of anything that we have or allies or adversaries have, then that at least makes us pay attention and say, look, we don't have an answer to the UFO mystery, but we should be looking at it through the lens of a potential defense and national security issue. And that, of course, is exactly why the US government now has congressional hearings on this. And we see this in both the Senate and the House, in the Armed Services Committees, the Intelligence Committees, the Oversight Committees. And this subject has come from fringe to mainstream, and rightly so.
I'd like to ask you both, perhaps starting with Dr. Whitehouse. I mean, do you genuinely believe that alien life exists?
Yeah, I'm sure it does, but I have absolutely no proof whatsoever. And the recent spate of objects seen in space is no proof of anything. They are certainly, if you analyze them carefully and scientifically, not breaking any laws of physics. They're not doing anything unusual. And in most cases, as far as you can identify them, they are pretty ordinary objects. So we are seeing a spate of the mundane be interpreted as the extraordinary. And there has always been a plan to break this news to the public. When I was a journalist at the BBC, we were always talking with ministers and secretaries of states. And one of the things we used to break the ice with was talking about aliens. And we had ideas and plans as to what to do, as you would expect that if we had to break news about wars or conflicts, we had ideas to do that. And there are scientists currently, and for instance, at the St Andrews Post-Detection SETI Hub, who are talking to governments of all around the world and politicians about how this should be done. So there are ideas and plans about what this means. But at the moment, we have nothing to talk about. There is no evidence whatsoever of alien incursion into the Earth, nothing unusual, nothing that cannot be explained when you look at it scientifically. I wish there were. I was in the UFO encyclopedia in 1985 saying that I would believe it if they landed on the Whitehouse lawn. And I didn't mind if it was the one in America or the one in Hampshire where I live. I wait for the evidence. So many people have got fuzzy blobs. So many people have got stories. Nobody has got evidence.
Let me ask you, Nick. I mean, is your hunch that we are not alone in this universe?
Yes. Life out there, I'm absolutely sure. Life visiting us down here, I don't know, but I hope so, because I think the world would be more interesting with aliens in than not, as I think we've seen with the buzz of this discovery just in the last few hours. And as for how it might be announced, I just have this wonderful vision in my head. And I know this is a very US-centric thought, but I imagine the President of the United States going live on television and saying, "My fellow Americans, people of the world, we are not alone." And I think we might be the generation that sees that. I certainly hope so.
David, Dr. Whitehouse, I think you wanted to come in and make a point there.
It might happen in the future with a discovery, but the idea that cover-ups, conspiracies, that we have the evidence that we are being visited is delusional. I would hope the American president, whoever he or she is, would say we have evidence that we are not alone in the universe because of science, not because of fantasy.
Okay, well, indeed.
Well, I hope that science is the key to this. And, that's not to say that we shouldn't look at the other data too. And I'm pleased to say that the newly formed task force on the declassification of federal secrets will be looking at this subject too. So I think we've got everyone working on this, whether it's the government officials or the scientists. But I think a multidisciplinary approach to this is the way forward. But it's certainly an interesting time to be having this conversation.
Yeah, and what do you think is the enduring appeal of this search for life beyond our solar system? I mean, help us get to the bottom of it. Nick, your thoughts first.
Well, I think it's one of the biggest and most profound questions we can ask ourselves as humans. There are, I suppose, a certain number of big philosophical questions. What if anything happens to us after we die? But the question of whether or not we're alone in the universe, that's one of those big questions. And it's also, if we are talking about a civilization and not just microbes, it's a potentially very impactful question, because as I said earlier, the idea that there might be civilizations out there with a billion-year head start on us, what might their knowledge of science be? What might their engineering skills have brought up? Arthur C. Clarke once said that any sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic, and that excites me.
Okay, Dr. Whitehouse, what do you think is the reason for this perpetual appeal of the search for life beyond our solar system?
Well, I think most people want to find out if we're alone in the universe, if there are beings born under the light of different stars that have grown up and share our wonder of the universe and see it the same way we do. And they may have knowledge, they may have information and technology that we don't. And we should be very careful about interacting with them, because knowledge, particularly over such a long period of hundreds, billions of years, could actually be very dangerous to us. So it is a dangerous enterprise. But fundamentally, it is a search for our place in the universe, our understanding of how we fit into everything. Do they see the universe the same way we do? I'm not so much interested in an alien's science, because they would understand hydrogen molecules, they would understand electronics and planets and stars and like that. What I would like to hear is their art, their literature, their philosophy. That would really tell us about how different we are from them and how they see the universe differently from us. That would tell us a great deal about ourselves. It was once said, I think, by the philosopher Lauren Isley, we will never understand ourselves until we look at ourselves through the eye of an alien. I hope one day that we will have that point of view, but I hope we will have the discussion leading up to that, because we need to talk about this. The idea that we could encounter the adjacent possible is something that could happen tomorrow, and we need to be ready, and we're not.
Indeed. Well, maybe it's on K2-18b, the first the first life form outside of our solar system that we become aware of. Okay, so we're in this situation where we've identified what could be possible life on this very distant planet, which doesn't have a very catchy name, I should add. Perhaps that'll change. What has to happen next? What's the next step? Finding out more as to what's happening on a planet 124 light years away from planet Earth. Dr. Whitehouse?
We probably won't make a great deal more progress on this, because this is at the limits of detection to develop dimethyl sulfide in the atmosphere of this planet, and that even if we had longer observations and better signal to noise on the spectra, then we probably wouldn't be able to say very much. And the problem with biosignatures on exoplanets is that the exoplanets are very variable. They're different sizes, they are different stars that are different distances, and therefore the atmospheres are not the same, and therefore with different sensitivities, different objects, different mixes of gases, it's very difficult to actually say anything other than that's a significantly interesting molecule there, and we might not have expected it. And if we find life on one of these exoplanets, it probably won't be a single event where we look at a molecule and say, that's indication of life. We probably have to gather spectra from the James Webb, from the Habitable Worlds Observatory over many years, and then stand back and make a judgment and say, all things considered, we believe that that has all the attributes we would expect if we're looking for a ecology or a biology. So no, short of it, as Nick might imply, short of a signal or an arrival, it's going to take a few years, perhaps decades, to actually look at these objects and say, I think there's probably life there.
OK, well, at least we perhaps know where to point the telescopes to find out more, or at least have a clearer idea. Just lastly, Nick, 'cause we're nearly out of time. I mean, does all of this, just to sum up the conversation, does this all sound to you like the closest we've ever been to possibly finding or identifying life beyond our solar system? Is this the way it looks to you?
Yes, it does. I think it is the best ever evidence, but yeah, we're not quite there yet in terms of crossing the line. So close, but no cigar. But what an amazing discovery! And if it kickstarts this conversation and, of course, more science, then that's all good.
All right, Nick Pope, thank you very much indeed to you. And a very big thank you as well to Dr. David Whitehouse. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for a look back at the highlights of GNT. Until then, bye-bye.